a few days back, someone asked me to do a bit of an updated look at my torrenting setup. Now, I think it's been, a good maybe 5 or so months since I last did a video on this. It hasn't changed a ton since then, but basically no one saw that video, so I think it's pretty much safe to do this video anyway. So there's a couple of different parts that actually come with my torrenting setup. The first one is the actual daemon that will accept the magnet links and accept the torrent files and actually download stuff. Then we've got the client interface. I've also got an RSS feed reader. The RSS feed reader is really useful for what I mainly use my torrenting for. And we've also got all of the little helper scripts just to make it a bit more easy to actually work with this. So let's just go over to my main screen. And you can probably guess already what I'm using for torrenting because it's pretty much what everyone else uses. So I'm using transmission. So if you don't have that installed, you can go sudo pacman-s transmission-CLI. And when you download this, you get a couple of different things. So you get the actual daemon, you get the CLI interface, and I think there's something else, but I don't ever use the something else anyway. The two important ones here are the daemon and the actual interface. So if you try to run transmission-remote-CLI, this is the actual interface that I'm using. If you try to run this straight after installing transmission, it's not going to work because the first thing you're going to have to do is make sure you actually enable the transmission daemon. Without the transmission daemon, the rest of this completely falls apart. So make sure you're actually running transmission daemon. So just run this and make sure you fork it into the background, and then you will be good. So typically what I do is I just have it getting started in my Exinit RC. I know there's other ways you can do it, like you can have it started as like a systemd job. I like to just start it in my Exinit RC just because that's the way I normally do stuff, and I guess I had removed it just before. I think I was testing some stuff and forgot to put it back, but anyway. Basically, all you're going to want to do is have this started in here. Make sure it's being started before whatever RSS program you're using, because if you try to add stuff before the daemon is started, there might be a problem. Generally, though, it's not going to start pulling in stuff as soon as your system boots, but just to be on the safe side, I guess. Anyway, that kind of leads us into what I'm using for my RSS feed, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's just have a bit of a look at remote CLI. Actually, no, before we get to that, let's have a look at the configuration file for the transmission daemon. So that will just be in the .config folder, in the transmission daemon folder. So you've got a couple of different folders in here if you're using my setup. So you have the transmission folder, you've got the transmission daemon folder, and you'll have the transmission RSS folder. Let's just have a look at what's in the transmission daemon folder. In here, it's nothing too crazy. You have a block list if you've got one downloaded. You've got the things you want to resume. You've got your torrents, and you've got some other stuff in here that's not too useful. But the one we care about is the settings.json file. So since last time, not much has changed in here. The first thing that you notice will have changed if you did see that video, if you're like one of the 100 people that actually saw that video, is that I now have a block list enabled. Not really because I had any reason to add it, just because it's generally good practice to add a block list. So if you don't know what a block list is in regards to torrenting, basically it's a list of IP addresses and a list of URLs that are just basically getting blocked because they're either scam websites or they have malware, things like this. Things that you generally just don't want on your system. Some people like to run them because it's supposed to stop you getting DMCA letters in the mail. Your ISP is going to know what you're doing regardless of what you're doing, so you're not really going to get around it like that. So just don't do anything too illegal, I guess. Don't do anything illegal. That's what I'm going to say. Don't do anything illegal. I'm not endorsing anything. Anyway, basically I've got a couple other things in here, like my download directory I've just got set to my anime folder because pretty much all I use this for is for that. So if I download anything else though, it's just going to go there. Not really a big deal. So I could move it to like a downloads directory and then move stuff over. That's too much work. I'd rather just have everything just dumped into this folder because 99% of what I use this for is going to go in this folder anyway, so I might as well just have stuff getting put in there by default. Anything that doesn't get complete though will get just dumped into my downloads folder. Generally, I don't have anything that just doesn't get complete. I think I have that disabled. Yeah, I do have that disabled. That should be enabled. My bad. So anything that doesn't get complete will just be put into this directory here. I guess I must have forgot to enable that for some reason. The other thing that's changed since last time is that I'm actually randomizing my port on boot. Now, for whatever reason, I've had some issues having a static port. I don't know whether that's my ISP being annoying or whether that's something to do with my router. Once I set it to a random port though, basically have had no problems, so you can change the range that it's going to run in. I wouldn't recommend setting this value too low unless you know exactly what ports are being used by what applications, because if it goes much lower than this, you're going to get into the range of ports that are actually being used by other applications. So once again, unless you know what ports are actually being used, just leave this as the default value. If for whatever reason you need to change it though, you can change it in here. Now, basically everything else in here is pretty much the default settings. The only other thing I've done in here is I've got a script running when a torrent actually finishes. Now, one thing that I did notice is that if you modify this file when the transmission daemon is running, it might just decide to rewrite the file. So make sure that if you actually do make any changes to this file, that you do it when the transmission daemon isn't running, because when you quit the daemon, it might just decide to change stuff. So I don't know what's happening with that, but I have noticed that from time to time. So just keep that in mind, I guess. Now let's actually have a look at the interface that I'm using. So as you can see, it's transmission remote CLI. I'm not writing all that out, so I'm just going to use my shortcut. So this is a pretty basic interface. If you're not too happy with this, there is a GTK interface and a Qt interface also available. There is also a web app you can use. I'll show you the web app in just a moment. But you can do basically everything you want to be able to do in here. You can move around with Vim keys or your arrow keys, and then up the top here, it basically just tells you everything that you can do. So if we want to just have a look at this torrent, we can just press enter on it, I think. Press enter on the actual, the seeding part of it, I guess. And this will basically give you all the information. I pretty much never look at this. I just look at this front page here and just make sure stuff's working. Let's just have a brief look at that web interface. So that'll be this page here. It's what you'd expect from a web interface, basically. So you can configure transmission from here. You can do all of the basic transmission stuff. Nothing too crazy, I guess. It works as you would expect it to work. I don't really have anything exciting to say about this web interface. Now, what about the other parts we have? So we've still got the transmission RSS and the scripts to look at. Now, transmission RSS, the one problem I have with it is that it's written in Ruby, and Ruby is a garbage language. I generally don't have a problem with programming languages, but Ruby is the one exception just because of the way that it handles installing applications and installing application updates. But anyway, this application it does exactly what it says on the box. It'll take in an RSS feed and it'll download the things from the RSS feed and put them into transmission. That's pretty much all it does. So let's just have a look at the config file for that one as well. So it's pretty straightforward. It's in your .config folder in the transmission RSS folder. So we saw that one just before. Basically, there is this single file in here. I don't think the file is made by default, so you'll have to make this yourself. But it says how to do this on the GitHub page over here. So just have a scroll down, and it's pretty straightforward how it works. So I've got this URL in here, and then I've got this massive regex statement. This massive regex statement will basically take this feed and then just take out what I actually care about. So nothing too crazy there. It's a regex statement. I'm not going to go into regex in this video. It works as you'd expect it to work. So I believe you can just have as many links as you want. I don't think there's a limit, so you just add a link, add a regex, add a link, add a regex. And you can also change the download path, the seed ratio limit. Basically, it'll let you do some of the configuration for transmission from this file if there is something you want specifically set up for that RSS feed. I don't really do any of that though. I just want a regex of the stuff that I care about. So mine is pretty basic, I would say. So there is one more part that we care about. It's kind of a couple of parts. So it's the actual scripts that I use to make this work seamlessly. Now the first one is my MIME app. So if we go into my .local folder, into my share folder, into my applications folder, you'll notice a couple of things in here. The only one we care about right now is torrent.desktop. This is basically a very, very simple MIME application, which will basically just run another script I have called transadd on the value that's passed into this. So basically I have this run whenever I run a torrent file or whenever I click on a magnet link. Now the way you actually have that work is you go into your config folder once again, and you go down to your mimeapps.list file, and there's two lines in here that you want to add. So you want to add this xscheme handler /magnet equals torrent.desktop, and also the application /x.bittorrent equals torrent.desktop. This first link in here will make it so when you click on a magnet link in your browser, basically it's just going to run this application and then add it to transmission. This second one in here will make it so when you run a torrent file, it'll be added to transmission. Now, I did say there was a script that I'm using in that MIME application called transadd. Now, that script is pretty straightforward. I've got all my transmission scripts in this folder, in my scripts folder called transmission. Makes sense, as you would expect. Basically, what this is doing is it's going to check if the transmission daemon is running. If it's not running, then it's going to actually launch the transmission daemon. Then it's going to run the command transmission-remote-add, and then take in the value passed in, which will be the link to that torrent file. And then after that, it's just going to send a notification to say, hey, a torrent was added, and then it's going to update my little module up here to say, hey, a torrent was added. Pretty straightforward. I've got a couple other scripts in here, as you may have noticed. We've got the transclear, tordone, and also notify torrent. So let's start with the transclear. This is a pretty straightforward one that I really need to rewrite. Basically, what it does is it's going to clear out all of my completed torrents. I've got that running in a cron job every like 6 hours or so. So I do a bit of seeding and then I get rid of stuff. Pretty straightforward. The next one is tordone. Also makes sense exactly what this does. It will send a notification with the name of the torrent saying, hey, this torrent has finished downloading. And then it will update this module I have up here that basically will say how many torrents are actually downloading. That's actually another part that I need to show you. I need to show you how the polybar module up here actually works. And then this last one we have here is the notify torrent. This is also pretty straightforward. So if I press Super T, I get a little notification up here to say what torrents are actually in here and how much they've actually finished downloading. So that's pretty useful as well. This is a garbage script. I wouldn't recommend copying what I've done in here. This, once again, also needs to be really rewritten. It works. It's not the quickest way you could do this, though. So, I'll rewrite this at some point because, as you see here, basically, it's just iterating way more than it needs to because I wasn't sure how to actually iterate to the end of a string within awk. But, as I said, I'll fix this at some point. It does work, though. Now, we have that polybar module as well. Now, I didn't actually update this from when I was using i3, so it's actually still in my i3 folder because the format didn't actually change. But this one's also pretty straightforward. So we're running the transmission-remote-l command, and that command will basically list out everything that's going on in transmission. So if we just run this here, transmission-remote-l, so we have the ID, we have how much it's done, we have how much you've downloaded, the ETA till it's done, the up speed, the down speed, the ratio, the status, and also the name. So pretty much all I'm doing is I'm grepping out the stuff that I care about and then sticking it in this polybar module up here. And then in my polybar config file, so I'll just show you that briefly as well because why not, we're already here. So this is just in a little module called torrents. Basically, I've got it set up as a custom IPC. So if you don't know, if you've never done polybar before, a custom IPC is basically a way to have it set up so a module will only update when I tell it to update. So if you saw with those previous scripts I showed you, there was that polybar message command. That's pretty much how I'm updating this module here. So when I tell it to update on hook 0, it's going to rerun the i3 torrent script, and then the output from this script is just going to be stuck up in the module up here. Now you may have noticed I had this other thing in here, so click left. Now what this click left basically does is makes it so if I ever feel like clicking on the polybar module up here, it's just going to open up transmission remote CLI. I pretty much never use this, but on the off chance that I ever feel like clicking on my polybar, then that's just a way to do that, I guess. The way I normally open up transmission remote CLI though is by pressing Super Alt and T. So I've got that set up in my SXHKD config. Basically that's how I normally open it because normally I don't really care too much about using this for too long. So I don't really feel the need to open up a terminal and then open it up like that. It makes more sense to me just to open it up in a temporary terminal that'll disappear as soon as I close this application. But depending on how you like to work, you may not really like that setup. You might prefer to just open it up directly in a terminal like this, transmission remote. This is why I use aliases because this is ridiculously long. Basically like that. That's another way you can do it, as I showed you earlier on, but I don't ever open it up like this just because, as I said, I typically just want to check stuff briefly. I don't normally want to keep it open for too long. The one issue I have run into with my magnet link script is that for whatever reason, Brave just does not want to interact with my MIME apps. I have no idea why Brave is just completely ignoring them. It works fine in Firefox, it works fine in literally every other browser, but if you want some extra reason to hate Brave, there's a good reason for it. For whatever reason, it just does not care about my MyMap. So if someone knows how to fix that, leave me a comment down below because I'd be very happy to hear about that. But as I was saying before, I don't really ever actually download stuff unless I'm going to download like a Linux ISO or something. I don't typically go out of my way to download stuff. I'll usually just download it with my RSS feed. So I would say that's pretty much everything for my torrenting setup. If you want to use any of the scripts, they'll be on my GitHub down below, so feel free to check any of those out. But as I was saying earlier, they also need a bit of work, so if they just suddenly change, that's going to be why. So if you want to use any of the setup, then feel free to do that. I would say it's a pretty solid and pretty basic torrenting setup. I know some people have done stuff way more complicated than I have, but to be honest, I just wanted something that worked. And this works, so I'm just going to leave it as it is, basically. Besides fixing up those scripts, I guess, when I get around to it. But anyway, let's end the video there. So before I end the video, though, I want to thank my patrons, Andrew, Rode, LQ, Larry, and Zilver, because they help make this channel possible. So if you want to support the channel, or if you just want to have your name read out at the end of a video, there'll be a link to my Patreon down below. If you want to monetarily support the channel, but you don't want to support me on Patreon, there's also some other links down there, like my Amazon affiliate links, where you can buy the gear that I use for these videos. So I've also got my social links, so my Discord and my Telegram, and my alternate video platforms for my BitTube and my library. Also remember to smash the like button and leave me a comment, and remember to subscribe and ding the bell icon down below as well. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.